All right, welcome back to our subsection on strain theory. And here we're going to talk about two more modern versions of strain theory, one called general strain theory and one called institutional anomie theory. And these two theories really take strain in very different directions. General strain theory is a micro theory designed to explain criminality of individuals, whereas institutional anomie theory is a macro theory designed to explain differences in crime rates among groups. So they're taking this idea of strain that came from Merton and Durkheim and all these earlier theorists, and really kind of branching it out and taking it in two very, very different directions as a theory of crime, right? Now, the first one we're going to talk about is general strain theory. And this is from a guy named Agnew. And Agnew looked at at Merton's theory and those other strain theories, and he said, look, similar to that whole status thing, um, it's not strain isn't necessarily economic, right? It can be economic, but it's not necessarily economic. It's just about the goals people have, right? That might be economic goals, it might be personal goals, it might be educational goals, it might be all different kinds of goals, right? But it's the failure to achieve those goals that causes strain, whether it's economic or not, right? And the kind of goals people have are going to be different for everybody. And in addition to that source of strain, that failure to achieve those goals, he also identified two other kinds of strain that people can experience. And they're similar but different. They're the removal of positive stimuli and the presence of negative stimuli, right? So it means essentially losing good things or introducing bad things, right? So failure to achieve goals might mean, oh, I failed to graduate from college, or I failed to get a good job, or I failed to be married by the time I was 30, or whatever my particular goals are, right? Removal of positive stimuli might be, the death of a loved one, or, my car breaks down, or, some other thing that I like and enjoy gets taken away or removed somehow. And then presence of negative stimuli is the introduction of something new that is not good. Maybe I get sick, or maybe I'm forced to now live with a roommate that I don't like having, or something like that, right? And it's all three of these sources of strain that come together, and according to Agnew, they primarily cause an increase in anger, right? In these negative emotions that people have, that frustration and anger and how dare they, right? How dare these bad things happen? How dare I fail to achieve this goal? How dare the my car break down, or my pet died, or I'm so upset with this. And these happen to all of us, right? Everybody has varying levels of strain. Everybody fails to achieve goals sometimes. Everybody loses things we like, or has things introduced that into our lives that we don't like. The difference is coping strategies, right? These different coping strategies can either constrain our strain and anger and frustration or not. And there are healthy coping strategies and there are unhealthy coping strategies. Healthy coping strategies are things like therapy and meditation and yoga and exercise and listening to music and all these other things that most of us hopefully do when we experience these strains, when we experience this stress, when we experience these issues and problems in our lives. The problem is when people have bad coping strategies or no coping strategies at all to constrain these feelings. Drugs and alcohol, physical violence, kind of, all those other negative coping strategies or lack of coping strategies causes people to experience these strains and then go out and commit crimes of different sorts if they don't have these good coping strategies to deal with these strains and frustrations and all those other issues, right? Now, according to Agnew, not all strains are equal, right? Just because I have one strain and you have another strain doesn't mean those are necessarily equal, right? So obviously, say the death of a spouse is going to be a stronger strain than something relatively minor. Like, oh, I lost a video game or something, right? That's a very minor strain. There are the things that make strains stronger or less, more impactful or less impactful are things like if they're seen as unjust, right? If I fail to win a race, I'm going to be sad and that's going to be a strain, but it's going to be a bigger strain if I think the person who did win cheated, right? If I get fired from a job, that's going to be a strain, but it's going to be a bigger strain if my boss completely made something up to fire me for, right? The stronger the strain is, the higher magnitude of the strain, the more impactful it will be, right? So getting a cold will be is lower magnitude and thus less impactful than getting cancer, right? If the strain is something that is associated with low social control, so being the victim of a crime is a strain that is associated with low social control, right? Or if the particular type of strain is somehow provides pressure towards a criminal coping mechanism, right? So if it's a type of strain that I lost my job, but I need money to buy drugs, and I don't have my job anymore, that strain is going to push me towards some kind of criminal coping rather than other. So not all strains are equal in magnitude or in impact or in kind of odds of affecting criminal behavior. All right? There's also objective strain and subjective strain. And objective strains are ones that basically everybody would find stressful. Right? Losing a job, death of a spouse, death of a pet. Everybody or almost everybody would be objectively subject to strain in those situations. Whereas subjective strains might be stressful or strain to me, but not so much to you, right? Like failure to get married by the age of 30. Some people, that's a really big deal. Other people, who cares, right? My internet is down. To me, that would be a huge strain. I practically live on the internet. But other people, they don't really care. They're going to go outside and play or read a book or, do lots of other things that don't require the internet. So subjective strains aren't necessarily higher or lower in impact, but they're ones that other people might not see as a strain at all. Or if they do see it as a strain, they see it as a much lower version of strain than others. Whereas objective strains are things that there's universal or near universal agreement on are bad, right? Agnew also introduced ideas of things like vicarious strain, right? So these are strains that are not necessarily impacting you, but are impacting those around you, and that can actually be associated with issues. So maybe I didn't get diagnosed with cancer, but my neighbor did. That can be a vicarious strain, right? My neighbor is experiencing this strain, but that could even have effects on me. Or my teacher lost her job. I really liked this teacher, and they were a really good teacher, and now they've lost their job. That is a strain on them, but it could affect me, right? Then there's anticipated strain. So this is a failure to achieve goals, or removal of a positive stimuli, or presence of a negative stimuli that hasn't happened yet, but we at least believe that there is a good chance it is about to happen. And that can have an impact, right? So maybe, oh man, I know I'm going to get fired soon, or oh, my company's going out of business, I'm going to lose my job, or oh, my spouse smokes 5 packs of cigarettes a day, so it's just a matter of time before they get sick from it, or so that kind of foreseen future strain can have impacts, right? Now, that's the general strain theory. That is the micro level theory. That is kind of the modern outgrowth of those older, Anomie and Merton and those older strain theories. Institutional anomie theory is also a newer strain theory, but instead of trying to kind of explain the criminality of individuals, institutional anomie theory is about explaining variance in criminality among groups, right? And this one was first kind of described and published by Mesner and Rosenfeld way back in the 90s. And what they kind of looked at is the relative power of these different societal institutions, these different societal values, right? So there's economics, there's politics, there's family, there's a few more, right? But when each of those institutions has a balanced level of power, there's very little crime. But when one or more of those institutions gets either too much power or too little power in a society, it causes crime. And the kinds of crime are going to be different depending on which one of those institutions has more or less power. The most commonly studied one, because the one thought to be the most applicable to the United States especially, is that the economic sphere, the economic factor, the economic influence is completely high out of whack with all these other institutions of power, right? And this can cause effects on others. So, and it can be worse or better depending on these different factors. But it's what do we value where do the American people see the value of these different institutions? How can that affect which ones are most powerful and less powerful? What is our culture coming together to show value for, right? And there's a saying that I brought up in my public policy class where it's don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value, right? So what is our culture actually valuing? How is our system designed? Not what do we say we value, not what do surveys show that we value, but how does the design of our society, how does the design of our legal system and our political system and our economic system, what are the different choices there that demonstrate which of these institutions is the most powerful and the least powerful, right? So when childcare is not given by the political system, by the legal system, the way it is in most countries, because we just don't have the money to pay for it. That's showing that the political and the economic are more important to us than family. When politicians are seen as, oh, they're all the same, they're all greedy, they're all horrible, they're all biased, that's an indication that the political is not important to us, right? When both parents have to work due to requirements to pay rent and buy food and stuff, and don't have the time to spend with children that parents in other countries do, or parents used to in the United States, that's an indication that the family is less important to us as a society. So the family institution is relatively low in power. When schools have these vastly overcrowded classes, that shows that the family and education institutions are less powerful than the economic, right? So there's example after example of how we here in the United States have kind of designed our culture, and there's evidence that the economic institution, the economic realm, the economic factor is by far the most important and most powerful in the United States today. And that's going to be true of a lot of other countries around the world to varying degrees, right? So there have been a couple of major tests of this, looking at cross-national data, right? So we get data on economic and political and family and all these variables that we think can directly measure the relative power of these institutions, and we compare them country to country to country to country, right? So there have been two big ones, at least that I'm aware of. And these look at things like, to measure the relative value of these different institutions, they look at things like the Gini coefficient, okay? And the Gini coefficient is about economic inequality, not necessarily rich or poor, but inequality. So if everybody has essentially equal amounts of economic capital, whether it's everybody being poor or everybody being rich, that's a Gini coefficient of 0. But if one person had all the wealth and everybody else had none, that would be a Gini coefficient of 1. So it's a measurement of the concentration of economic capital, whether we're talking high amounts or low amounts. It's not about numbers, it's about ratios, right? So a high Gini coefficient means a high concentration of wealth. A low Gini coefficient means a low concentration of wealth. Then they also looked at things like government spending on social welfare, right? Economic corruption, things like that. There's a lot of different variables. And they controlled for age, and they controlled for actual economic, the gross national product per person, right? So whether a country was total rich or total poor, they ignored. They only looked at things like economic inequality via the Gini coefficient, right? And what they found was the higher the Gini coefficient, the lower the spending on social welfare, all of those indicators as predicted in institutional anomie theory of having an imbalance of power among all those institutions can successfully predict things like a high homicide rate, high theft rates, right? So multiple different kinds of crime seem to be higher the more you have an imbalance in these systems in any given country, right? Now, of course, it's going to be impossible to directly measure the power of the family system and the economic system and the political system and the educational system and all these different other institutions. But using the best kind of proxy measures we have, it seems to be that the more those are out of balance, the higher crime gets. Okay? All right. That is the end for this subsection. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.